For formal introduction purposes, my name's Chabwera Kauma. I'm a master's student and an AI enthusiast and software developer. And I really take this as a privilege and an honor to be able to speak to such a vibrant audience. My topic for today will be quite simple and straight to the point. It's entitled How to Future-Proof the Relevance of Tertiary Education Using AI. Maybe I think it would be important to break down a few terms from this introduction. And one of the key ones here is tertiary education. Tertiary education in this regard, I'm primarily focusing on university and college education, right? And then when I talk about future proofing, I'm looking at how you can make the content provided in tertiary education, as well as the graduates that are coming from tertiary education, relevant for the future using AI. So if I were to restructure my title, that's what it would look like. So this is a brief 4 sets of focus areas that I will look at. I will not take so much of your time. So we'll first of all look at the key global phenomena that you should consider with respect to artificial intelligence, and then we will then see how this relates to tertiary education and the students that are coming out of tertiary education themselves. Next, we'll touch on the statistics about AI and employment. This is very critical. We'll get to that in a moment. And then we'll look now at the relevance of tertiary education in an AI-first world. So this one is really the heart of the subject matter. So we'll spend quite a bit of time on this part. Then finally, we look at how to make tertiary education fit for AI. So I hope this is fun. Let's stay interactive and let's enjoy. Yeah, so there are primarily two phenomena that I would like to bring to the discussion today. And the first one is the Great Reset. The Great Reset is a very important and crucial phenomenon that is occurring in our world today as a result of the COVID-19, as well as the digital disruption that has been occurring in our world and globally in the past few years. I've even put a link just for reference sake. So the Great Reset, in a nutshell, is focused on how many industries globally are changing their mode of operations, how businesses are shifting their mode of operations, how students are expected to rethink their approach towards education, how governance leaders and thinkers and researchers, including us in this Indaba, are supposed to be thinking going forward. The Great Reset in much respect is very technology dependent. It speaks about how the lives of people, employment, and how the world is going to shift to a new focus point, right? So if anyone wants to look through this subject, you can look at that website I've put as reference. But it is critical that the Great Reset subject is going to the subject matter we are discussing today in relation to how tertiary education is relevant in AI. And then secondly, we will then touch on the 4th Industrial Revolution. So the 4th Industrial Revolution, just like many other revolutions in the past, has been the next level in terms of how industries have conducted themselves, in terms of focus areas where investments have gone to, as well as how professionals in different industries have had to look at the future. These two, the Great Reset and the 4th Industrial Revolution, are very important in seeing how leaders, researchers, students, as well as governance leaders can think about the future going forward. So that's why I wanted these 2 points to remain in our minds as we go forward in this discussion. Next, I think this is an interesting section that will be important for what we are looking at today. This section just shows you some statistics I got that speak about how artificial intelligence will transform how employment is done, how it will redefine what we call employment today. Of course, even the previous speakers had hinted to how it does not imply AI does not come to replace employment, but to play a complementary role. But of course, there are numerous factors that need to be taken into consideration when looking at the AI. So one of the first ones, as you can see, is more than as many as 20 million manufacturing jobs may be lost to robots by 2030. That's one. Of course, it would need further deep dive. And then by 2025, growing job demand for 97 million people will be needed for jobs such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, as well as process automation specialists, big data specialists, and more, which is really the foundation of this Indaba for today, which I think is very important. And then 43% of manufacturers have been added to data scientists as well as data quality analysts in workforces, and 35% want to do the same within 5 years. Then the final stat we have for today is 54% of the executives say that implementing AI in their workplace has increased productivity. So we can even see a correlation between artificial intelligence and its impact on productivity in the workplace. And then now we will look at the real core of this talk for today. So I'll give you a summary here. So historically speaking, tertiary education has been seen as the primary avenue within which a society develops its citizens in order for them to be productive, in order for them to earn a living, and in order for the nation to gain a competitive advantage going forward, right? And this has been the same for a long time. However, if we look at developing nations, especially in Africa, and as populations have grown and the demand on education has increased, you have more students enrolling into colleges and universities, and this in itself is a very positive thing. However, the biggest challenge that has come about is you find a lot of students have the same qualification, but there's normally a lack in terms of how this qualification can be unique in industry and how it can actually uniquely provide a value in society as well as in industry. So I think if you look at the subject of relevance of the tertiary education industry, you can see that in as much as we have educational content, in as much as we have increasing numbers, as much as we have increasing numbers in terms of enrollments, which is a positive thing, it is important then that we also see how we can equip learners, how we can equip students to be uniquely placed in terms of having a unique advantage. How can, what skills, what additional things can be added in order for students to be fit for the future and to not feel like their education is irrelevant. And that really is the core of this point. And then the final point here is it speaks to a very valid point here in that it says the present day need in industry and from governance leaders globally is not the ubiquity of educational content, but the explorative and innovative potency of delivery built into how the disciplines are structured. So in simple terms, what industry and what nations need at this point in our development in Africa is not just many degree holders, not master's degree holders alone, or PhD holders alone, but we need unique skill sets that contribute innovation, that are able to bring about development in a way that nations can find value, right? So that's what we are looking to do today. And in doing that, we need to look at how artificial intelligence can help us achieve this value that students greatly need, right? So what's the next one? Yeah, so how can we make tertiary education fit for AI? So we have tertiary education on one end and we have artificial intelligence on another. How do we bring the two concepts together? That's really the critical thing. How do we make our education, our tertiary education fit for the future using artificial intelligence? And the starting point, I think for me, that is critical for all of us to drive home, even after this talk, is how we can create strategies and methods that ensure AI literacy is increased, especially amongst lecturers in the tertiary education sector. I really liked how, for example, the number of talks we had previously brought some very valuable and practical information. But we need to see how this information can be part of lecturer training curriculums, for example. It would really add value to what's really to the kind of students we want to develop in our nations, as well as Africa as a whole. So the starting point for me is education. And the education in this regard is on the lecturers. And we're not just looking at IT courses primarily, we're looking at every field, every course that is being taught in our tertiary education. How can we ensure that we prioritize that lecturer training incorporates artificial intelligence, so that the paradigm for teaching already has artificial intelligence as a focus point, and it will help learners be more receptive to what artificial intelligence is all about. And then, in addition to that, we could also, as a nation and as a continent, look at how we can strategically introduce foundational and refresher AI courses for all fields. So the emphasis is on all fields, right? So we don't just want to look at artificial intelligence for IT people, but we want to ensure that artificial intelligence becomes the mainstay for every field and every discipline. In fact, I even loved how one of the speakers is a health, his core specialty is health, but he's also gotten into artificial intelligence, which brings the point home ultimately, in that we can get more Zambians, more Africans who are doing accountancy, for example, who are doing agriculture, having artificial intelligence as one of the foundational aspects they get in the learning process. So maybe if we look at our colleges, we look at our universities, what reform can be introduced to ensure that we have some foundational AI courses as well as refreshers, so that we have every level of tertiary education adequately equipped to be fit for the future with artificial intelligence. And then also, we also need to look at abstraction. Now, when I talk about abstraction, I'll spend a bit of time explaining that. I think at times what the biggest challenge that we have in terms of adoption of AI in Africa and in Zambia is the fact that the terminologies and the words that are used seem very complex, and it's sometimes intimidating for many people that may not be IT people, right? So it's important that as we as a community, as well as an industry, are striving to enhance AI adoption in Africa and in Zambia, we must see to it that even the information or content we are producing, as well as the material that is being created in tertiary institutions, is not too complex. It should be relatable. It should be simple and easy to grasp. That way, to take away the fear many people have, because at times when we hear a field that's primarily focused on mathematics and statistics and calculus, it may be intimidating, and it would also actually affect many developing nations and many students from considering artificial intelligence. And then on top of that, I think another aspect that is critical to consider is mathematics. I think mathematics, as it's already been stated, is a very critical aspect to artificial intelligence. And with that being said, it's important that as a nation in Zambia, as well as in Africa, we make strategic partnerships, we make efforts, and I liked that earlier it was already cited that we need to take actionable steps as members of this Indaba, as well as the industry, to see how best we can accelerate AI adoption. But the biggest hindrance to AI adoption is mathematical competency, for example. Mathematical competency has been a great stumbling block for a nation adopting AI. So I think we need to strengthen STEM courses. We need to ensure that many of our tertiary institutions focus and prioritize mathematics from a foundational level. This would ensure that even when a student is faced with artificial intelligence material, they are not intimidated at all. And this should also be done not just from an urban perspective, but also from a rural perspective. Because I think sometimes when we discuss matters in relation to AI, it is normally from an urban point of view, but we have to be holistic. We have to ensure that rural settings as well as urban settings are not left behind. And of course, there are many issues from a rural perspective, but I think it's critical that both aspects are taken into account. And then going further, it's also important that we see how we bring collaborations. Collaborations are critical in research and in projects, but ensuring that these collaborations are done without separating IT people from non-IT people. So one thing we can already see from the Indaba we've had today is artificial intelligence and its application is very broad. It applies itself to many things. We've seen use cases in healthcare, for example. We've seen use cases cited in many other spheres. So the biggest challenge we have in many of our settings, nationally and even as communities, is we find that the core subject matter experts do not have an understanding of the technological component of AI, whilst the IT people who know AI do not have the subject matter understanding. So you have, we have a situation where you have blind spots on both sides. The IT person is not very conversant with, for example, the specifics of healthcare, right? Whilst the healthcare person may understand the healthcare aspect, but he does not fully understand how this can apply from an AI perspective. So I think we need to harmonize both aspects in order for us to see value and in order for us to also see unique applications, because I think the value of AI comes down to its unique application. So collaborations and collaborations between IT and non-IT students in tertiary education is critical in order for us to see change and progression. And then I think this point has already been cited earlier. Data, the value of data in AI is very critical. And if we speak from a Zambian perspective, there are not so many publicly accessible data sources that may be very sector specific. So let's say you are building a supervised learning model for the manufacturing sector. It may be very challenging for a student in the tertiary education sector to be able to find training data or test data that relates to such very not so publicly experimented sectors. So I think it would be critical as an industry to lobby the relevant people, and in the slides I cited Zicta, in seeing how we can create strategic partnerships, look at the key stakeholders, and see how we could create a national platform, an open source national platform, where different people who come from different industries and sectors can bring their expertise in terms of subject matter knowledge, as well as the understanding of the intrinsic data in that sector, and then see how researchers and students, especially in the tertiary education space, can benefit from such data sets, because I think that's one of the biggest hindrances. You find that, I think there was some examples cited of Kego, but I think you find that there's not so much in terms of local data, because data is critical in that it defines how accurate the model will be, right? So we need to ensure that we get a local perspective. And from when I say local perspective, it's important that we get to collaborate, get to ensure that data is available as required, and we are able to then allow students and learners to apply themselves with this data. And then finally, I think what would be also important and valuable is to see how best we could have a theme, a yearly theme, that helps researchers in academia focus their energies on seeing what pressing industry issues or government-related issues can be solved collectively. Because I think for me, the value of AI comes from collaboration, and it comes from solving valuable problems. Another reason why I think we haven't seen so much in terms of investments locally in terms of artificial intelligence is because of its usage. Many leaders at times do not see the value of something until there are use cases relating to it. So I think such an idea or initiative would help in driving the value of artificial intelligence and ensuring that tertiary education prioritizes AI. So I think if there are any questions for me on the points I have driven, I would be grateful to take them.
All right, thanks, Chabwera. So I'm trying to go through the chat to see questions. What I was seeing was more of people being in agreement to say, yes, like indeed certain aspects that you mentioned are key, including collaboration. I am yet to see any questions, but we can still get back to you on any questions that would come towards as we conclude. So I'll just.
So there's some in question and answer. There's one on infrastructure. There's one on helping people when they're school dropouts. There's one about focus going down to primary and secondary school. So if you look in the question and answer, maybe.
Okay. I didn't see the Q&A. Yeah. So. So we have Wellington. He asked about infrastructure. So what infrastructure do we need to put in place to enhance curriculum development and implementation in the education sector? But before you take this one, I'll also mention another one so that you can take two at a go. Kennedy also asked how we would actually help those that have interest and ideas with AI while the students while they're actually school dropouts. So you're going to take those two from Wellington and Kennedy.
Okay, so let me start with Wellington. Thank you for the questions. So in terms of infrastructure, I think for me, one thing that's critical in terms of how investments are done from an infrastructure perspective is about whether there has been value that has been shown, right? So that's why if you've seen from my slides, I have talked about how it's critical to show value first in order for you to attract investment. But I can already see with the drive towards the fourth industrial revolution, there's been a lot of government initiatives around driving access to especially digital infrastructure. We see mobile network providers reaching very far-flung areas in terms of internet access, as well as even the cost of smartphones now has really reduced. So I think even our idea of education going forward will not purely be physical education, as we've seen with the COVID being with us, but it will be a mix of physical as well as digital access. And that would come down to smartphone apps, as well as Zoom sessions, for example. But I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done in terms of research and also rural areas. I think the biggest challenge, if you talk about infrastructure, is rural areas, because I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done at many levels, but it's a developing story in terms of infrastructure. Hope I've answered that question. Then I would go to the next one. How would we help those who have interest and ideas with AI while they are school dropouts? I think for me, such initiatives like the Indaba, for example, are very crucial. They are not limited to people who are kind of not too complicated. I think for me, when you use the word dropout there, I think it's important that our mode of conveying ideas around artificial intelligence are in a simple manner that can be understood, and taking advantage of social media, just like this Indaba is being streamed on social media, it helps with reaching out on critical information.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much. Actually, that's very true. So we also have two other questions. So I have one from Clement and the other one from Nisa. So Clement is asking if it's possible that focus of AI can be narrowed down to primary and secondary school level. I guess it's slightly related to Kennedy's question. And then we have Niza, who was also asking what you think about graduate programs that are related to AI in Zambia. So are there any attachment programs available? Yeah, so you could maybe help us with those two, and we can close with those two questions.
Okay, so maybe I'll start with Clement. Clement's question is on, is it possible that the focus of AI can also be narrowed down to primary and secondary school level? Very true. I think if you saw in my slide, I cited the importance of lecturer training incorporating artificial intelligence. But I think to answer your question, maybe even TEVETA, which provides certification of teachers, for example, certification for teachers in Zambia, can also incorporate artificial intelligence as a foundational aspect that would help teachers in terms of drilling primary and secondary school students with at least some starting knowledge, because I think, as you've rightly put it, primary and secondary school is foundational to what a student eventually becomes in tertiary education. So I think it comes down to ensuring that as an industry, we are reaching out to strategic people that can formulate policies that are future-centric and that can help primary and secondary as well as tertiary education going forward. And then in terms of Nisa's question relates to graduate programs. I think AI really is a developing field, it's a developing field. If you could take a survey, you would not even find so many institutions in terms of tertiary education providing qualifications for AI, but it's a developing field. And I think with time, with knowledge, with Indabas like this one, it increases awareness from institutions as well as learning institutions and can actually create such opportunities. But online, otherwise, you'd find a lot of big tech institutions that provide some programs. For example, IBM, I think, have a program in relation to AI. I think even Google have a program in relation to AI and math. So I think that's the starting point for now. But before we get to having local ones, we can leverage on those.